There is a gap that's going to need to be fixed, and therefore there are going to be more tax rises. I don't expect any significant changes to corporation tax. My feeling this year is fairness means imposing more taxes on people who certain people or think tanks consider don't pay their fair share at the moment.
Hello and welcome to The Insight in 15. I'm Stuart Burt and today I'm joined by my colleague Tim Sarson, Head of Tax Policy at KPMG UK, to talk about one of the biggest moments in the business and political calendar. That is, of course, the budget on the 26th of November. Tim, welcome to the podcast.
Good to be here.
Now, Tim, almost a year ago, the Chancellor said that she was not going to be coming back for any more tax rises. She said that to the CBI conference. It feels very different 12 months down the line. What is the scale of the challenge facing the Chancellor, both economically in terms of the fiscal gap she has to fill, but also politically?
The scale of the challenge, a lot of it is, for want of a better word, self-inflicted, because it's because of the fiscal rules that both the previous government and this government have adopted, that say by the third year in the Treasury forecast, we need to have essentially balance the books. And we need a bit of headroom, and that means you can't borrow your way out of any problems. So you think about the last 20 or so years, generally speaking, when the government hasn't had enough tax revenue coming in and it's got spending commitments, it's just borrowed more. And until recently, the interest rates were pretty low. So it's a combination of them having set pretty strict fiscal rules, almost uniquely, I think, in the developed world, having this OBR arrangement where you've got a third party that is opining, is marking your homework, and so it means that your scope for filling around the edges is a bit limited, and then interest rates rising significantly, meaning that suddenly we have a whole load of spending that we didn't have even like 3-4 years ago. That's what's landed the government in this problem, and so there is a black hole, there is a gap that's going to need to be fixed, and therefore there are going to be more tax rises.
And to fix that gap, as you say, you can change your fiscal rules. That's one option. Another is to increase taxes, and we'll come on to that. The other is to reduce public spending as well. Do you see that being an option, a lever that's pulled?
I think it'll be part of it. I think this budget is going to stand on its own 2 feet as a tax-raising budget, and the fiscal gap is going to be narrowed largely through tax rises.
Okay, and what about for business? Because I think it's fair to say at the last budget, business felt a little bit bruised by what was announced, particularly the rise in employer national insurance contributions. What are you hearing from the business leaders that you speak to today in terms of their hopes and potentially their fears about what is coming down the track in the next budget?
So there's business and business, right? So even last year, some businesses were affected, substantially. So owner-managed businesses was really the owners who were very much affected by the business property relief changes for inheritance tax, and then big employers because they had the employers' NI change. And even within big employers, it was those who had a lot of people at the lower end of the pay scale that were obviously affected more, because they also had the double, triple whammy of changes in labour law as well, and the minimum wage. This year, I don't expect any significant changes to corporation tax. So in the narrowest sense of business taxation, corporation tax, it's the most stable of all the taxes, it seems to me. And there have been repeated promises by the government that they're not going to increase the rate of corporate. I don't think they're going to cut it either, but they're not really doing much to the corporate tax regime. So outside one or two sectors we'll come back to, corporate tax stays stable. I don't think personally there is some speculation around coming back for more on things like carried interest, capital gains tax rate, and inheritance tax, lifetime gifting, etc. That's related to business in the sense of business owners. I don't personally think they're gonna go there, and I don't think they're going to go after employers' NI again, with the one exception of possibly, because there's been a lot of noise about it, employers' NI on pension contributions, because that would raise quite a lot of money, and it's one of the less sort of politically painful things that they might do to raise a significant amount of money.
So let's turn to tax itself at the budget, and from what we're hearing being briefed out potentially from the Treasury, fairness is going to be at the heart of the budget, and fairness in the tax system in particular. What does fairness in the tax system mean?
fairness in the tax system this year, it means different things to different governments and at different stages of the political process, doesn't it? My feeling this year is fairness means imposing more taxes on people who certain people or think tanks consider don't pay their fair share at the moment. So then you've got to think about, okay, who are those groups of people? So they went after landowners and business owners last time with the inheritance tax changes. So that bit of fairness has been done. There's nothing left to squeeze out of the North Sea. So the idea that you can go after more windfall taxes or higher profits taxes on North Sea ring-fenced oil and gas is not happening. So what does that leave? It leaves the banking sector. But this is a bit of a 50-50. So the government could raise some helpful extra money by either increasing or changing the thresholds for the bank levy or the banking corporate tax surcharge, or even going further. And there was an IPPR proposal for a windfall tax on banks that have benefited from QE and interest rates, etc. So it looks tempting, but then Reeves has been quite strong in her reassurances to the financial sector that she considers the competitiveness of that sector as important. And then there are a few other areas, for example, more broadly extending the basis of national insurance that covers landlords, for example, or pension income, or doing the income tax NI swap idea that the Res Foundation have come out with, which maybe we could talk about in a bit more detail, because I think that's a high likelihood.
Well, I was going to ask, one of the biggest theories or proposals out there that is being touted is actually one that would breach the manifesto, which is an increase in income tax in particular. You could go VAT or others, but certainly the income tax. Do you think they're going to go there? Do you think they need to go there just by virtue of the size of the fiscal hole?
I think they might well go for the swap. And it's interesting. You think about last year, they didn't break the manifesto, or at least they didn't break the letter of the manifesto, because they raised employers' national insurance. And what the manifesto had said was, we won't raise taxes on working people. You could argue, but that's not the working person, that's the employer. I think there's a similar argument you could possibly, particularly now that working people has been defined in a little bit more detail since the election. You could make an argument that if you raise, this is the Res Foundation proposal, if you raise income tax by, say, 2%, and at the same time you cut the rate of national insurance by 2%, then most working people, certainly people earning below a certain income threshold, won't see a tax rise. So you could argue that that's not breaking the manifesto, or certainly not breaking the letter of the manifesto. Obviously, it brings in a lot more tax. So I think the calculation is that'd be 6 billion of additional revenue just by doing that swap. There's quite a lot of sort of interesting logic, economic and political logic behind this, which is why I think it's a runner. Although there will be losers, obviously, it looks fair, but it also looks like you're simplifying the system. So the previous government, in his last budget, Hunt said, well, he'd quite like long-term to see national insurance disappear, employees' national insurance disappear as a tax, because it's distortive, because it's another system. It's not really hypothecated. It just goes into the pot. If you promise every year that, and this is the thing, you can do a one-off of 2 and 2. But if you promise that every year from now until the end of the Parliament, we're going to cut national insurance by 2% and we're going to raise income tax by 2% until national insurance ceases to exist, and we end up with a much higher income tax basic rate and higher rate, then not only are you raising, I think that would then be cumulatively 18 billion by that important year 3, but you're also doing something that sounds like a sensible idea and is simplifying the tax system. So that's definitely one to watch, I think.
Great. And let's go through a couple of other quickfire rumours or suggestions, and just a yes/no on whether you think the Chancellor will introduce them. You've already covered a few, but a few others out there. VAT changes?
No, I don't think so. I think there are quite a few things that they could think about doing, particularly in terms of the scope of VAT around the edges. Some the scope of exemptions in parts of financial services, but not big ticket changes to VAT, I don't think, and certainly not an increase to the rate of VAT, because I think they're really allergic to anything that would be directly inflationary.
Changes to fuel duty hasn't been changed for 10 years.
So Chancellor's always chicken out caco on that one, so I think she'll chicken out again.
Fine. Gambling tax?
Yes, almost certain. Politically just really easy to do, and regardless of what the gambling industry will have been saying, it's a fairly sort of sensible representations they've made. I think that's nailed on.
Related to CGT, and exit tax for those leaving the country, wealthy people leaving the country?
Quite difficult. 50-50 on this. That's one that might get put in the consultation pot, because remember, there's you can announce a change or you can not announce a change, but there's a halfway house, which is where you say we're going to consult on maybe making some changes.
Council tax hasn't been touched since 1991.
Council tax, almost certainly there will be some tinkering and probably some increases to the overall rate, and some changes in some tinkering around the valuation banding. Yes.
And finally, any surprises, any rabbits out the hat?
I wouldn't put it past them to. I think she'll need one or two positive things. I wouldn't put it past her to do something on stamp duty on shares. There's been a bit of noise about that, or SDLT, particularly given Kemi Bain not announced that in the Tory conference. So those would be the two things to watch, I think.
Great, thank you. I completely failed to make that a yes/no answer, but lots of really good, interesting predictions there. If that's the predictions, what then is the outlook for business? What does this all mean for business? And particularly, how do you square, on the one hand, a tax-raising budget that fills a short-term fiscal hole with the whole swathe of other policies that government has talked about aimed at increasing economic growth?
Most of the measures that we've been talking about and that have been speculated on, quite a lot of them are collected by business, but they're not necessarily ultimately suffered by business. A lot of those that are collected by business and then passed on to the customer or to the employee, essentially. So actually, I think if you look at where the tax rises are likely to hit, most of them probably are hitting individuals rather than businesses. But obviously a fiscal tightening, and remember last year's budget was not net of fiscal tightening because there was increased spending announced as well. A fiscal tightening has a negative impact on spending, both business spending and household spending. So it's not great news for business. The question is, could it be worse? I think the answer is yes. We do have a stable majority government over the next several years. The UK we're not in isolation here. So our tax burden, it's higher than it's been for a long time, but it's still lower than most of our developed country peers. Not as low as the US, but it's lower than most developed country peers. Our deficit is not as big as a lot of our peers, including the US, far bigger one. So I think it could be worse. And in a world where there is a huge amount of geopolitical related and trade instability everywhere, alongside obviously quite strong fiscal competition from the US. They are doing quite a lot to make it attractive to invest there. But the UK is not that badly placed, I don't think. If you sort of take a step back and look at the UK as a destination for business, I still don't think it's too badly placed.
Great. Just time for one last question, our usual final question, which is, if you have one piece of advice for business leaders looking at this budget, either anticipating it or responding to it in a few weeks' time, what would it be?
I would say, unless you absolutely have to, don't press the button on doing anything based on speculation. And there's so much being speculated on that actually that they're not going to implement everything that's being speculated on. Otherwise, they'd be raising about 100 billion. So just wait, and you'll have plenty of time in December and January and the coming months to act on what actually gets announced in the budget.
Tim, thank you very much for joining the podcast. Just a few weeks to go till the big moment. Yes, the Chancellor's big budget, but more importantly, we'll see whether Tim is right on his predictions or not. In the meantime, if you like the podcast, please do like and subscribe on all major platforms, and we will see you again for the Insight 15.